What happens when the ultimate demon slayer meets an unthinking, all-consuming biological horror? Imagine the chaos as Doomguy, fueled by pure rage and an arsenal of devastating weapons, faces down an entire Tyranid Hive fleet. This isn't just a fight, it's a universe-altering clash of two unstoppable forces, and the implications are absolutely terrifying. Before we dive into this case file, if you enjoy deep dives into terrifying scenarios and nightmare battles from across the multiverse, hit that subscribe button. We bring you the darkest case files, the most brutal encounters, and the stories that keep you up at night. Now, let's begin. This is Incident Report Omega Crimson 7. Location: the mining colony world of Valenor's Rest, Segmentum Obscurus. Date: September 3rd, 998 M41, 8:23 p.m. Primary Investigator: Inquisitor Gregor Valdane of the Ordo Xenos. The first thing you need to understand about Valenor's Rest is that it died 3 times. The first death was quick. When the shadow in the warp descended, every psyker on the planet felt it simultaneously. Astropath Gerina Crost was in the middle of transmitting grain requisition reports when her eyes began to bleed. She described it later, in the moments before the Inquisition mercy killed her, as feeling the universe develop teeth. Not metaphorical teeth, actual teeth, grinding, chewing, consuming the space between stars. Lieutenant Alexei Voronov was drinking his 3rd cup of recaf when his console started screaming. Not alarming, screaming. Every sensor he had was maxed out, redlined, begging him to acknowledge what was coming. He'd been a communications officer for 8 years. 8 years of watching empty space, of filing reports nobody read, of counting down to a retirement that would never come. His wife had left him 2 years prior, tired of living on a world that smelled like promethium and tasted like rust. His daughter sent letters twice a year, each one more distant than the last. None of that mattered anymore. "Palov," Voronov said quietly to the ensign at the secondary console, "tell me what you're seeing." Ensign Palov was 19 years old. This was his first posting. His hands shook as he cycled through the readings. "Sir, I'm seeing biosignatures. Massive ones. Dozens of them. No, hundreds. They're not matching anything in our databases." Voronov pulled up the orbital feeds. 12 defense platforms ringed Valenor's Rest, each one equipped with long-range Auspex arrays capable of detecting ships at the edge of the system. All 12 feeds were dead. Not offline. Dead. The last transmission from Platform Gamma 3 was a visual feed. Voronov watched it 3 times, trying to understand what he was seeing. Something had attached itself to the platform's hull. Something organic. The camera angle shifted as whatever it was began pulling the station apart, and for just a moment, Voronov saw inside it. It was full of teeth. "Get me Governor Draven," Voronov ordered. His voice sounded calm. That was good. Someone needed to sound calm. The Vox crackled. "Lieutenant, this had better be worth interrupting my dinner." Castellan Victor Drauven's voice carried the bored irritation of a man who'd never seen real war. He'd purchased his governorship through family connections, and he treated the position like an extended vacation. "Sir, we've lost all orbital stations. Unknown biosignatures are entering the atmosphere. I'm implementing evacuation protocols." A pause, then laughter. "Evacuation? Do you have any idea what that would cost? The system defense fleet will handle whatever Xenos filth think they can threaten an Imperial world. Return to your station, Lieutenant. That's an order." The connection cut. Voronov sat very still for 3 seconds. Then he opened the All Frequencies emergency channel. All PDF forces, all Imperial Guard units, all civilian authorities. This is Lieutenant Alexei Voronov. Defense Installation Primus 9. We are under attack by unknown Xenos forces. This is not a drill. Take shelter. Arm yourselves. May the Emperor protect us all. He closed the channel and looked at Palov. "Start recording everything. Every sensor, every camera, every Vox transmission. Someone needs to know what happened here." The spores began falling 18 minutes later. They came down like meteors, but wrong. Meteors burned. These things pulsed. Each one was the size of a building, organic and wet and covered in chitinous plating that absorbed the heat of atmospheric entry. They hit the ground and split open like obscene flowers, and things came out. Voronov watched through the external cameras as the first wave emerged. Hormagaunts, though he didn't know that name yet. All he knew was that they moved like insects but were the size of men, and they moved fast. Faster than anything had a right to move. Defense Installation Perseus 7, 200 kilometers south, opened fire first. Voronov listened to the Vox traffic. Commander Tellen's voice was steady, professional. All batteries firing. Good effect on target. Enemy forces are... They're not slowing down. Repeat. Enemy is not... God Emperor, there's thousands of them. We need reinforcements. We need... Static. Perseus 7 went dark. 200 men, gone in 4 minutes. Sir, Palov said. His voice cracked. What are those things? I don't know. Voronov pulled up every file in the Imperial database. Orcs? No. Dark Eldar? No. These were something else. Something that moved with a unity of purpose that felt less like an army and more like a single organism. The second death of Valenor's rest began when the Tyranids reached Primus 9. Voronov was on the command balcony when he first saw them crest the eastern ridge. The sun was setting behind him, casting long shadows across the killing fields. For a moment, silhouetted against the dying light, the approaching swarm looked almost beautiful, like a tide, like a force of nature. Then they got closer, and Voronov saw the details. The way their legs bent at angles that shouldn't work. The cluster of eyes that reflected no light, that seemed to absorb it. The mouths that never stopped moving, clicking, tasting the air. All batteries, Commander Petrov's voice boomed across the installation. Fire at will. The defense lasers opened up. Brilliant red beams that could punch through tank armor sliced into the swarm. Hormagaunts exploded, their ichor spraying across their swarmmates. The autocannons joined in, each shell detonating with enough force to crater Rockcrete. For 30 seconds, Voronov thought they might hold. Then the warriors arrived. They were 3 meters tall, towering over the lesser organisms. Their carapaces were thick enough to turn aside last fire. Each one carried weapons of living bone that spat bioplasma hot enough to melt through ceramite. But it wasn't the weapons that terrified Voronov. It was the intelligence in their eyes. These things were thinking, planning. One of them pointed a talon toward the eastern wall. The wall exploded from beneath. Raveners, serpentine nightmares with blade-tipped tails, erupted from tunnels they'd carved through solid bedrock. They'd been burrowing while the swarm distracted the defenders. Now they were inside the installation, tearing into soldiers who'd never expected an attack from below. Private Mikhail Sokolov, a man Voronov played cards with every Friday, died on one of those blades. Voronov watched it happen through the security feed, watched the Ravener's tail punch through Mikhail's chest, lift him into the air and shake him like a dog shaking a rat. Fall back, Petrov was screaming now. Fall back to secondary positions. But there were no secondary positions. The eastern wall was gone. The western wall was being overwhelmed. The northern batteries had gone silent. Voronov grabbed his last pistol and ran. He found Sergeant Helena Kovar near the primary armory. She was organizing a fighting retreat, her hell gun barking short, controlled bursts. Kovar was 43 years old, a veteran of the Tyrol campaign where she'd lost her left eye to orc shrapnel. She'd seen horrors before. This is different, she said when she saw Voronov. No preamble, no panic, just a statement of fact. These things aren't attacking us, they're harvesting us, there's a difference. How many do we have? 37 able bodies. Maybe 10 more if we count the wounded who can still pull a trigger. A Hormagaunt burst through a side corridor. Voronov fired on instinct, his last pistol taking the creature in its thorax. It stumbled, ichor pumping from the wound, but kept coming. He fired again, and again. The 5th shot finally dropped it. The mining tunnels, Voronov said. We evacuate through the old network. It's our only chance. Kovar nodded once and started shouting orders. The group moved as a unit, soldiers covering each other as they fell back. Behind them, Voronov could hear the installation dying, metal tearing, men screaming, the wet sounds of things eating. They reached access shaft 7 as the eastern section collapsed entirely. The explosion threw Voronov forward. Something hot and sharp raked across his back, and he felt blood soaking through his uniform. He ignored it and scrambled into the shaft. The mining tunnels were dark and cold, lit only by emergency illuminators that cast everything in sickly yellow light. The group moved in silence, weapons pointing at every shadow. Then they heard it. Above them, the sound of metal being torn apart, but not quickly, methodically, deliberately. Through a gap in the tunnel ceiling, Voronov saw it. The Carnifex was 4 meters tall and looked like someone had tried to build a tank out of muscle and bone and rage. Its crushing claws were bigger than Voronov's entire body. It was tearing through the installation's main vault, ripping apart reinforced blast doors that were rated to withstand artillery bombardment. The Carnifex paused. One of its sensory organs swiveled toward the gap in the ceiling. Toward them, everyone froze. The Carnifex stared at them for 5 seconds that felt like hours. Then it returned to its work, tearing apart the vault to get at the stored machinery inside. "It doesn't see us as a threat," Kovar whispered. "We're not worth killing." They kept moving. The tunnels descended deeper, following maintenance shafts that hadn't been used in decades. Voronov's back was agony, each step sending fire up his spine. Private Dmitry Volkov, a kid from the southern provinces who still wrote letters to his mother, walked beside him, ready to catch him if he fell. "Sir," Volkov said quietly, "what are we going to do?" Voronov didn't have an answer. They'd been walking for 30 minutes when the tunnel opened into a vast cavern. One of the deep excavation sites from when the colony was first established. But that's not what made everyone stop. In the center of the cavern hung a wound in reality. That's the only way Voronov could describe it. It wasn't a door or a gate or a portal. It was a place where the universe had been cut, and something else was bleeding through. The edges pulsed with crimson and emerald energy that hurt to look at. Not physically, spiritually, like looking at something that violated every natural law simultaneously. "What in the Emperor's name is that?" Kovar breathed. Magos Theron Karlix pushed forward. The tech priest's robes were torn, his mechadendrites damaged and sparking, but his augmented eyes focused on the phenomenon with an intensity bordering on religious ecstasy. "Remarkable," Karlix said in his mechanically modulated voice. "This energy signature matches nothing in the Mechanicus archives. Not warp technology, not Xenos phase manipulation, not anything. It's as if someone took a hole puncher to the universe itself." He extended a mechadendrite toward the anomaly. The mechanical tentacle got within a meter before it recoiled violently, as if it had touched something burning. "The field is actively resisting analysis," Karlix continued. "Whatever technology created this, it operates on principles we don't understand." As if in response, sounds began emanating from the wound. Distant sounds, industrial, aggressive, music, but wrong, too harsh, too angry, the roar of weapons that ran on combustion instead of energy cells, and something else, a sound that might have been a human voice but stripped of anything resembling mercy or doubt. "Should we go back?" one of the soldiers asked. "Find another route?" Before Voronov could answer, something changed. The wound flared brighter, the energy intensifying until Voronov had to shield his eyes. When he looked again, someone was stepping through. The figure was humanoid, roughly 2 meters tall, but nothing else about it seemed human. The armor was green, the color of oxidized copper, and it was covered in damage that told a story. Scorch marks from energy weapons, gouges from claws, stains that were definitely blood, though from what species, Voronov couldn't guess. The helmet was smooth and featureless except for a reflective visor that revealed nothing. The weapons were wrong. That was Voronov's first coherent thought. They were wrong in the way that things from nightmares are wrong. A shotgun, but massive, designed with a brutality that went beyond function into art. A chainsaw, but serrated and angry, and clearly meant for flesh, not wood. Other weapons maglocked to the armor, each one screaming violence in its design. "Identify yourself!" Voronov raised his lespistol, his hand surprisingly steady. "By order of the Planetary Defense Forces, identify yourself immediately." The figure didn't respond, didn't even look at them. It tilted its head slightly, and Voronov got the impression it was listening to something. The distant sounds of battle, perhaps. The screaming of men, the shrieking of Xenos organisms. Then it started walking, not toward them, toward the tunnel that led back to the surface, toward the sounds of dying. "Sir?" Kova's voice was uncertain. "Should we stop it?" Voronov looked at the figures retreating back, at the weapons it carried, at the way it moved with absolute certainty, as if it had done this 1,000 times before. "No," he said slowly. "We follow, and we record everything. Palov, is that servo skull still functioning?" "Yes, sir." "Then document everything it does. If we're going to die, someone needs to know what happened here." They followed the figure back toward the surface. It never slowed, never looked back. It moved through the tunnels like it knew exactly where it was going, even though there was no way it could have known the layout. The climb took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of listening to the sounds of battle growing louder. 20 minutes of wondering what they were walking into. They emerged into hell. The surface installation was gone, not destroyed, consumed. In its place was a feeding ground. Hormagaunts were tearing apart corpses, their mandibles working methodically to reduce flesh and bone to digestible paste. Termagants were stripping a destroyed Lehman Russ tank, pulling apart the metal plating to extract promethium and minerals. In the distance, larger organisms were herding captured civilians toward digestion pools that bubbled and steamed. The figure in green armor stopped at the tunnel exit. It surveyed the scene for perhaps 3 seconds. Then it went to work. The shotgun came up first. The sound it made was different from any weapon Voronov had heard, not the crack of a laser gun or the boom of a bolter. This was deeper, angrier. Each shot was 2 shots at once, a double-barreled roar that sounded like the universe itself was being torn. The first Hormagaunt didn't just die, it ceased to exist. One moment it was there, mandibles clicking. The next moment it was a spray of ichor and chitin fragments painting the ground. The figure didn't stop. It moved forward, and the shotgun spoke again and again. Each shot was a kill. No wasted ammunition, no missed shots. The weapon barked, and things died. A Hormagaunt tried to flank from the left. The figure's arm shot out faster than Voronov could track. It grabbed the creature mid-leap by its skull and slammed it into the ground. The rockcrete cracked. The Hormagaunt's head pulped like overripe fruit. The figure didn't even break stride. "Holy Emperor," Volkov whispered beside Voronov. "What is that thing?" More Tyranids were converging now, drawn by the death of their swarm mates. Termagants scuttled forward, their flesh borers spitting living ammunition. The figure dodged. Not frantically, casually. It moved its head slightly left, and a flesh borer beetle passed through the space where it had been. It sidestepped right, and another volley missed by centimeters. Then the chainsaw came out. It roared to life with a sound like grinding metal and revving engines. The figure charged directly into a cluster of termagants. What followed wasn't combat. It was butchery. The chainsaw carved through chitin like it was paper. Ichor sprayed in arcs that painted the ground black and green. A termagant lunged at the figure's back. Without looking, the figure reached back, grabbed the creature, and brought it forward over its shoulder. The chainsaw met it halfway. The termagant split lengthwise, both halves falling away. "It's not fighting to survive," Kova said quietly. "It's fighting because it wants to. Look at it. It's enjoying this." A Tyranid warrior arrived, towering over the battlefield. The Synapse creature's presence immediately changed the swarm's behavior. The lesser organisms began coordinating, flanking, working together. The warrior itself charged, its bonezords raised. The fight lasted 15 seconds. The figure dropped into a slide as the warrior's first sword cut the air where its head had been. While sliding, it fired the shotgun upward into the warrior's thorax. The blast opened a hole the size of a fist. Ichor sprayed, but the warrior's biology was already compensating. The wound knitting closed. The figure came out of the slide into a roll, came up behind the warrior, and drove the chainsaw into the base of its skull. The warrior shrieked, a psychic wail that made Voronov's nose bleed even from 50 meters away. The figure held on. The chainsaw bit deeper, chewing through alien spine and brain matter. The warrior thrashed, trying to dislodge its attacker. It slammed backward into a ruined wall, trying to crush the figure between its bulk and the rockcrete. The figure didn't let go. With its free hand, it reached around and punched directly into the hole its shotgun had created. Its fist disappeared into the warrior's torso. When it pulled back, it was holding something that pulsed and writhed. The warrior went still. The figure dropped to the ground, dropped the organ it had been holding, and continued walking. Behind it, the warrior's corpse collapsed. The smaller Tyranids began backing away. "They're afraid," Voronov said. "The Tyranids are actually afraid." "Tyranids don't feel fear," Magos Kalix said. "They're biologically incapable of it. They're driven by hunger, by the will of the hive mind, but not by emotion." "Then what are we watching?" Kalix was silent for a moment. "A miscalculation. The hive mind is reassessing. This is unprecedented." The figure stood in the center of the killing field, surrounded by corpses. Its armor was covered in ichor, steaming where the acid tried and failed to eat through. It looked toward the horizon, toward Castellum Primus, toward where the largest concentration of Tyranids was feeding. Then it started walking. "We're following it," Voronov said. "Sir, that's insane," one of the soldiers protested. "We barely survived getting down here, following that thing into another fight. That thing just killed a Tyranid warrior in 15 seconds. If it's going toward the main swarm, I want to see what happens. Now move." They followed at a distance, using rubble and destroyed vehicles for cover. The figure never looked back to check if they were following. It simply moved forward with absolute purpose. The path it took was a straight line toward Castellum Primus. Every Tyranid organism in its way tried to stop it. Every single one failed. They passed Firebase Delta, now nothing but rubble and corpses. The PDF soldiers stationed there had made a stand. Voronov could see where they'd formed firing lines, where they'd fallen back position by position until there was nowhere left to retreat. The figure paused at the firebase for perhaps 5 seconds. It looked at the dead soldiers. Then it moved toward what remained of their ammunition depot. Voronov watched as the figure systematically went through the stored munitions. Grenades disappeared into pouches on its armor. Rockets, power cells, anything useful. The figure didn't ask permission, didn't requisition through proper channels. It just took what it needed. "That's theft of Imperial property," one of the soldiers muttered. "You want to tell it that?" Kovar asked dryly. They kept moving. The journey to Castellum Primus took 3 hours. 3 hours of following this warrior through a war zone. 3 hours of watching it kill every Tyranid organism that crossed its path. They encountered other survivors along the way. Scattered PDF units, isolated guard squads. Each time, Voronov tried to explain what they were following. Each time, the other survivors looked at him like he'd lost his mind, until they saw the figure fight. Corporal Andrei Volkov, Dmitri's older brother, was sheltering in a burned-out chimera with 8 other soldiers when they arrived. He took one look at the figure and went pale. "Alexei," he said to Voronov, "is that the same thing I saw an hour ago?" "Probably. What did you see?" Andrei laughed, but it was the laugh of a man who'd seen his sanity crack. A lictor tried to ambush it. You know what a lictor is? 6 meters of stealth-evolved killing machine. It can eviscerate a Terminator before they know it's there. This thing caught the lictor mid-leap, ripped off its scything talons and beat it to death with its own arms. Just stood there, using the lictor's talons like clubs, hitting it over and over until it stopped moving. "Where did it go?" Andrei pointed toward the capital. "That way, toward the city. I don't know what it is or where it came from, but I've been fighting these Xenos for 3 days. I've seen good men die. I've watched tanks get torn apart like toys. And I've never, not once, seen the Tyranids hesitate, until that thing showed up. They're afraid of it. The hive mind is actually afraid." "Then we follow it," Voronov said. "Join us. We're documenting everything." Andrei and his squad fell in. The group had grown to 47 now. 47 soldiers following a silent warrior towards certain death, because it was the only thing that made sense anymore. They caught up to the figure 3 kilometers from Castellum Primus. It had stopped at the top of a ridge overlooking the capital. Voronov raised his magnoculars and wished the universe would be merciful enough to let him die before he saw what he was seeing. The capital was being digested. The Tyranids had set up massive bioprocessing pools throughout the city. Buildings were being torn down, reduced to base components. Bodies were being dragged into the pools, living and dead together. The pools bubbled and steamed as they broke down organic matter at the molecular level. And in the center of it all, coordinating the feast, was the Hive tyrant. It was 4 stories tall. Its carapace was thick enough to shrug off heavy weapons fire. It had 4 arms, each ending in either bone-crushing claws or energy-wreathed talons. Its head was a mass of sensory organs and psychic amplifiers. Even from this distance, even through magnoculars, Voronov could feel its presence like pressure against his mind. "That's the synapse node for this entire region," Magos Calix said quietly. "If that creature dies, every Tyranid organism within 100 kilometers will lose coordination." "Can it be killed?" Voronov asked. "Imperial doctrine suggests massed Lascanon fire, orbital bombardment, or a full company of space marines. We have none of those things." The figure in green armor began walking down the ridge toward the city. "Or," Calix added, "perhaps we have something the Imperium has never encountered." They followed. The outskirts of Castellum Primus were a nightmare landscape. Streets ran with bioacid. Organic slurry covered everything. Digestion pools bubbled where parks and plazas had once stood. And through it all, the figure walked. The Tyranids noticed quickly. How could they not? Dozens of organisms converged on this single target that refused to die. What followed wasn't a battle, it was an execution. The figure moved through the swarm like a force of nature. Its weapons never seemed to run empty. Its movements never slowed. Hormagaunts, termagants, warriors, raveners, every organism that approached died. Some died quickly, shotgun blasts reducing them to ichor and fragments. Some died slowly, chainsaw cuts taking them apart piece by piece. None died successfully. Voronov and his soldiers followed in the wake of destruction, stepping over corpses that were still twitching. This wasn't Imperial doctrine. This wasn't even war as they understood it. This was something primal, something that existed before tactics and strategy were invented. This was violence as an art form. The Hive tyrant finally took notice. Its psychic scream hit like a physical wall. Voronov felt his nose start bleeding. Next to him, 2 soldiers collapsed unconscious. Sergeant Kovar gritted her teeth and stayed upright through sheer stubbornness. The figure in green armor didn't even slow down. The Hive tyrant charged, 4 stories of bioengineered killing machine moving with speed that defied its mass. The ground shook with each step. Its talons were raised, each one capable of cutting through a land raider. The figure dodged, not barely, not by luck. It simply moved, with perfect economy of motion, and the Hive tyrant's strike hit nothing but air. The creature's momentum carried it forward, off balance for just a moment. That's when the figure fired its rocket launcher. The explosion took off one of the Hive tyrant's 4 arms at the shoulder. Ichor sprayed like a geyser. The creature shrieked, a sound that made windows shatter 3 blocks away. But it didn't fall. It couldn't fall. Its biology wouldn't allow it. The wound was already closing, new flesh knitting together. The figure charged. It went low under the remaining talons and drove its chainsaw into the base of the Hive tyrant's skull. The blade bit deep, chewing through armor that could turn aside bolter rounds. Ichor sprayed, but the creature's regeneration was already working to push the blade out. The Hive tyrant reached back with one massive claw and grabbed the figure, lifted it into the air, brought it around to face those alien eyes that held an intelligence too vast and too hungry to comprehend. The Hive tyrant's jaws opened. Each tooth was the size of a combat knife. The figure reached to its back with its free hand and drew a weapon Voronov had never seen before. It was massive, bulky, covered in technological elements that looked nothing like Imperial design and nothing like Xenos technology either. Energy crackled along its length, green and furious and hungry. "Energy spike," Magos Calix screamed. "That's more power than a plasma cannon. That's more power than a lance battery. That's..." The figure fired the BFG 9000. The world went white, then green, then nothing. Voronov was thrown backward by the shockwave. He hit the ground hard enough to crack ribs. His vision went dark at the edges. His ears were ringing so loud he couldn't hear his own screaming. When his vision cleared, the Hive tyrant was gone. Not dead. Gone. erased. The creature that had been there 4 stories of biohorror no longer existed. In its place was a crater 30 meters wide and 15 meters deep. The ground had been glassed by the heat. The air smelled like ozone and burning meat. Every Tyranid organism within 50 meters had been reduced to ash. The figure in green armor stood at the crater's edge, completely unaffected. The massive weapon was already maglocked back onto its armor. What in the Emperor's name was that? Kovar breathed. Before anyone could answer, the sky began to darken. Voronov looked up and felt his soul try to leave his body. The Hive fleet in orbit had noticed, and it was responding. Mycetic spores fell like the end of days, not dozens, hundreds, each one containing organisms larger and more lethal than anything they'd faced. Trigons unfolded from their spores, 30-meter serpents with teeth that could chew through bedrock. Carnifexes, living battering rams covered in armor plating. Morlocks, ambush predators that could swallow tanks whole. The Hive fleet wasn't trying to harvest the planet anymore, it was trying to kill one target. The figure looked at the falling spores. Then it checked its weapons methodically. Shotgun, chainsaw, rocket launcher, that massive green weapon. Then it started walking toward the nearest impact site. "It's not retreating," Andrei Volkov said. "The planet's dying, the Hive fleet is dropping everything it has, and that thing is walking toward them." Voronov grabbed his Vox unit. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. "All PDF forces, all Imperial Guard units, this is Lieutenant Alexei Voronov. I'm broadcasting on all frequencies. 3 kilometers north of Castellum Primus, there's a warrior engaging the Tyranid swarm. I don't know who he is, I don't know where he came from, but he's killing them. Hundreds of them. If we support his advance, if we coordinate our fire with his assault, we might survive this. This is our last chance. All available units converge on my position." Static answered him. Then, "Lieutenant, this is Captain Gregor Valen, 7th Armoured Company, or what's left of it. We've got 1 Lehman Russ and 2 Chimeras. We're 20 kilometers south. Give us 30 minutes. Emperor, guide us all." More voices joined in. PDF units, guard remnants, a salamander flame tank company that had been trapped behind Tyranid lines since the invasion began, a squad of stormtroopers, a damaged Valkyrie with enough fuel for one more flight. They were all coming. "Sergeant Kovar," Voronov said, "form a defensive perimeter. When the others arrive, we're going to support that warrior. We're going to give him every advantage we can." "Sir, you realize we're probably all going to die?" "Yeah, but we're going to die fighting instead of being digested. Form up." Over the next 40 minutes, the survivors assembled. They had 8 armoured vehicles, including Captain Valen's Lehman Russ, 237 soldiers in various states of readiness. Ammunition was critically low across the board. Medical supplies were non-existent. Morale was held together by desperation and insanity. But they had one thing the Tyranids didn't expect. The figure in green armor had stopped waiting for the Tyranids to come to it. It was hunting them. Voronov watched through his magnoculars as the warrior engaged a Trigon that had just emerged from its spore. The serpentine creature was 30 meters of muscle and teeth. Its roar could be heard for kilometers. The fight lasted 45 seconds. The figure ran directly at the Trigon as it lunged. At the last possible moment, it slid under the creature's body, firing its shotgun upward into its soft underbelly. Then it was on the creature's back, chainsaw in hand, carving its way toward the head. The Trigon thrashed, trying to throw its attacker. It slammed itself against buildings, trying to crush the figure between its bulk and the rockcrete. The figure held on with one hand, chainsaw in the other, cutting deeper. Then the figure did something that made Voronov's brain refuse to process what it was seeing. It punched its free hand directly into the wound it had been carving. The arm disappeared up to the elbow into the Trigon's skull. When it pulled back, something came with it. Something that might have been a brain, or a nerve cluster, or a control organ. The Trigon went still mid-thrash. Its body collapsed, momentum carrying it forward to slam into a ruined hab block. The figure climbed off the corpse and kept moving. "All units," Voronov broadcast, "advance. We create corridors of fire for the warrior. Kill anything that tries to flank him." The Imperial force moved forward. It wasn't coordinated, it wasn't elegant, but it worked. Captain Valen positioned his Lehman Russ on a collapsed overpass, using the elevation for better firing angles. His battle cannon spoke once every 8 seconds, each shell clearing entire swaths of lesser organisms. The salamander flame tanks proved invaluable. Their promethium flames immolated hormagaunts and termagants by the dozens, denying the Tyranids their numerical advantage. The chimeras provided mobile cover, their multi-lasers cutting down anything that tried to approach. And through it all, the figure advanced. It moved like it had fought this war 1,000 times before, like it knew instinctively where every threat would come from. Voronov saw a Carnifex charge the figure from the left. Before Voronov could shout a warning, the figure was moving. It rolled under the Carnifex's crushing claws, came up with its rocket launcher, and fired 3 rockets in quick succession. The first destroyed the creature's left leg. The second opened its armoured carapace. The third punched through the opening and detonated inside the creature's torso. The Carnifex collapsed, internal organs cooking from the explosion. "It doesn't just react," Magos said, his augmented eyes tracking the warrior. "It predicts. It's operating on a level of combat awareness that shouldn't be biologically possible." They pushed forward for 2 hours. 2 hours of sustained combat. 2 hours of watching the figure kill everything in its path. They were making progress. Real progress. The Tyranid coordination was breaking down. Without the Hive tyrant, the lesser organisms were operating on base instincts. They were still deadly, but they weren't working together anymore. Then Voronov saw what they were advancing toward, and he understood why the figure had been moving in this direction. The Tyrannifex. It squatted in what had been Castellum Primus's central plaza, a living fortress the size of a hab block. Its armoured carapace was meters thick. The weapons grafted onto its body included a rupture cannon designed to crack bunkers and acid spray that could dissolve a tank in seconds. This was the anchor point for the entire Tyranid digestion network. Kill it, and the bioprocessing would collapse. The figure looked at the Tyrannifex. Then it started walking directly toward it. The ground between them and the creature was a lake of bioacid. The digestion pool was 50 meters wide, 3 meters deep, and actively dissolving everything organic it touched. The figure walked into it. "It's going to die," someone said over the Vox. "Nothing survives that acid, not even space marine armor." But the figure's armor held. Whatever material it was constructed from, it resisted where ceramite would dissolve. The figure waded through the acid like it was water, weapons ready. The Tyrannifex noticed. Its massive head turned, dozens of sensory organs focusing on this tiny thing that refused to die. The rupture cannon began tracking. "All units, take cover!" Voronov screamed. The rupture cannon fired. The weapon's blast could crack fortress walls. It was a concentrated burst of hypervelocity organic matter that hit with the force of an artillery shell. It caught the figure directly in the chest. The figure flew backward, propelled by the impact. It smashed through the wall of a ruined cathedral. Debris collapsed on top of it. Dust and rubble filled the air. 10 seconds passed. 20. "Is it dead?" Kovar asked quietly. Then the rubble exploded outward. The figure emerged from the ruins. Its armor was cracked, scorched, damaged in ways that should have been fatal. But it was still standing, still moving. And in its hands it held its chainsaw and a plasma rifle. The figure charged the Tyrannifex. What followed was systematic destruction. The figure didn't attack randomly. It targeted specific points on the creature's body with the plasma rifle. Each shot destroyed a bioweapon. The acid spray nozzles exploded, spraying caustic fluid across the creature's own carapace. The rupture cannon ruptured, venting pressure that cooked the surrounding tissue. The spine banks detonated internally, shredding muscle and sinew. The Tyrannifex tried to defend itself. It lunged forward, trying to crush this irritating prey under its massive bulk. The figure dodged and did something that made Voronov question his sanity. It jumped into the creature's mouth. "No," Valen breathed over the Vox. "No, that's suicide. That's..." Muffled explosions came from inside the Tyrannifex. Once, twice, 3 times, 4. The creature convulsed. Its body swelled, pressure building internally. Cracks appeared in its carapace. Then it exploded. The Tyrannifex's death was spectacular and horrifying. Its body ruptured from the inside out, spraying ichor and partially digested biomass across a 100-meter radius. Internal organs flew through the air. The stench was overpowering, and from the center of the carnage the figure emerged, covered in ichor, armor smoking, but walking steadily. The remaining Tyranid organisms went into disarray, without the Tyrannofex anchoring the synapse network. Without the Hive tyrant providing coordination, they began attacking each other in confusion. "All units, advance," Voronov ordered. "Push now while they're disorganized." The Imperial force surged forward. For the first time in 4 days, they weren't just surviving, they were winning. That's when the sky disappeared. Voronov looked up and felt his heart stop. A bioship was descending through the atmosphere, not a messetic spore, not a landing vessel, a full capital-class bioship from the Hive fleet's core. It was 8 kilometers long, a living nightmare of chitin and flesh and bioweapons. As it descended, it birthed new organisms directly from its hull, dropping them to reinforce the surface forces. "All units, fall back," someone was screaming over the vox. "Fall back to evacuation points. The planet is lost. Repeat, the planet is lost." Voronov stood frozen, watching the bioship blot out what remained of the sky. This was it. The end. Even if they killed every Tyranid on the surface, that ship would simply replace them. They'd lost. Movement. The figure in green armor was walking toward the Imperial evacuation convoy. Soldiers scattered out of its path. It walked directly to a Valkyrie gunship that was preparing for takeoff. The figure tore open the pilot's compartment and climbed in. "What's it doing?" Kovar asked. The Valkyrie's engines roared to life. The figure was in the pilot's seat, hands on the controls. Voronov's brain caught up with what he was seeing. The figure was going to fly directly at the bioship. He made a decision that was either the bravest or stupidest thing he'd ever done. "Sergeant Kovar, Magos Calix, Private Volkov," Voronov shouted. "With me, we're boarding that Valkyrie." "Sir, that's insane." Kovar stared at him. "I know, but someone needs to document what happens next. Move!" They ran, across open ground, while the sky fell and the bioship descended. They reached the Valkyrie as its engines were cycling up. Voronov threw himself through the side hatch, the others scrambling in behind him. The figure didn't stop them, didn't acknowledge them. It simply waited until they were aboard, then launched. The Valkyrie shot into the sky like a missile. The acceleration pressed Voronov back into his seat, crushing the air from his lungs. Through the windscreen, he could see the bioship growing larger, filling his entire field of vision. "Emperor preserve us," Volkov whispered. "We're flying directly at it." The bioship noticed the approaching aircraft. Organic anti-air weapons began tracking. Bioplasma turrets swiveled. Tentacles as thick as buildings whipped through the air, each one capable of crushing a tank. The figure piloted the Valkyrie like it was an extension of its body. It rolled under a tentacle that would have swatted them from the sky. Pitched left as bioplasma scorched the air where they'd been. Accelerated through a swarm of gargoyles, the flying organisms splattering against the windscreen. "I'm manning the door gun," Kovar shouted. She strapped into the side mount and opened fire. Her heavy bolter cut down gargoyles by the dozens, their bodies tumbling toward the ground far below. Magos Calix plugged his mechadendrites into the Valkyrie's systems. "I'm routing all available power to the engines. Weapon systems offline! Life support minimal. This will give us approximately 40 seconds of increased thrust before the engines burn out." The figure didn't respond, but the Valkyrie suddenly lurched forward with increased speed. They were close to the bioship now, close enough that Voronov could see the individual organisms moving across its hull, close enough to see the gun batteries tracking them. The bioship opened fire. Bioplasma lanced through the air. Spines the size of missiles shot toward them. The figure weaved between the attacks with precision that shouldn't have been possible. The Valkyrie's hull shrieked as they pulled G-forces that would have killed a normal pilot. One of the bioship's hangars opened, birthing more gargoyles. The figure aimed directly for the opening. "It's going inside!" Voronov shouted. "It's actually going inside!" They punched through the hangar membrane and into the bioship's interior. The inside was worse than any nightmare Voronov had ever experienced. The walls weren't walls. They were organs. Living, pulsing, breathing organs. amniotic sacs hung from the ceiling like obscene fruit, each containing a half-formed Tyranid organism. Neural pathways as thick as his leg ran along every surface, glowing with bioluminescence, carrying information to the Hive mind. The Valkyrie crash-landed in what might have been a birthing chamber. The impact was brutal. Voronov's harness cut into his chest. He tasted blood. His vision went grey at the edges. When it cleared, the figure was already out of the pilot's seat. It had weapons in both hands, the shotgun and the chainsaw. It looked at Voronov and the others for just a moment. Then it started walking deeper into the bio-ship. Tyranid antibody organisms were converging on their position. These weren't the organisms that fought on planets. These were specialized defenders, evolved specifically to protect the bio-ship's interior. They were smaller, faster, covered in bioacid that ate through metal on contact. The figure opened fire. Voronov forced himself out of his harness. Every movement sent pain shooting through his body. His background had reopened. His ribs were cracked. He didn't care. He grabbed his last pistol and followed. Kovar was right behind him, hellgun ready. Volkov was bleeding from a head wound but still moving. Margos Kalix's mechadendrites were sparking, but he drew a plasma pistol. They formed a defensive position, watching the figure push forward. It carved a path through the antibody organisms with methodical efficiency. Every shot killed. Every swing of the chainsaw dismembered. The deeper they went, the worse it got. The walls began closing in, the bio-ship's immune system recognizing the intrusion. Flesh grew across passages, trying to seal them in. The figure used its chainsaw to carve through the obstacles. They reached a junction point where dozens of neural pathways converged. Voronov could see bioelectrical impulses running along them, carrying information. This was important. This was vital to the ship's function. The figure began placing explosives. The devices were unlike anything in Imperial arsenals. Cylindrical, covered in digital readouts and strange markings. The figure worked quickly, placing charges at key neural junctions. "Margos," Voronov said, "do you have anything that can help?" Kalix was already moving. "The Valkyrie still has 4 missiles in its launch tubes. I can repurpose them as demolition charges. Do it. Fast." They worked frantically. Kalix's mechadendrites moved with inhuman speed, reprogramming missile guidance systems into simple timers. Voronov placed charges at what looked like major blood vessels, at neural nodes, at anything that seemed structurally important. The antibody organisms kept coming. The figure held them off, its weapons never stopping. Shotgun blasts echoed through the fleshy corridors. The chainsaw's roar was constant. "Charges placed," Kalix reported. "Timers set for simultaneous detonation in 3 minutes." The figure looked at them, then looked back the way they'd come. It started running. They ran. Through passages that were actively trying to close around them. Through chambers where half-formed Tyranids reached out with unfinished claws. Through corridors that seemed to scream as the bioship's immune system went into overdrive. Behind them, they could hear something. A sound like a whale singing, but wrong. Alien. The hive mind knew what they'd done. It was trying to stop them. Walls of flesh grew across their path. The figure didn't slow. It crashed through them with brute force, chainsaw carving a path. They reached the crash site. The Valkyrie was still there, more damaged than before, but potentially functional. "Can this thing even fly?" Kovar asked. The figure was already in the pilot's seat. The engines coughed, sputtered, died. The figure tried again. The engines caught. Barely. The Valkyrie lifted off the ground, wobbling dangerously. They shot toward the hangar opening. Behind them, the bioship's interior was going haywire. The walls were convulsing. The antibody organisms were swarming toward them. They cleared the hangar just as the charges detonated. The explosion was catastrophic. Every charge, every repurposed missile, every piece of explosive they'd placed detonated simultaneously at key points throughout the bioship's nervous system. The shockwave hit the Valkyrie and threw it forward like a toy. Voronov was slammed against his harness hard enough to break ribs. His vision went dark. He couldn't breathe. When his vision cleared, they were falling. The Valkyrie's engines were dead. They were in a barely controlled descent, the ground rushing up to meet them. The figure fought with the controls, coaxed the dying aircraft into something resembling a glide. They hit the ground hard, skidding across the ruins of what had once been a residential district. The Valkyrie's hull screamed as it tore through rubble. They came to a stop against a collapsed hab block. Voronov forced open the side hatch and fell out onto Rockcrete. He lay there for a moment, staring at the sky. The bioship was dying. It writhed in the upper atmosphere like a dying whale. Neural controls severed. Its body was shutting down. Atmosphere vented from massive ruptures in its hull. Partially formed organisms were expelled into the void, freezing instantly. The ship began breaking apart, 8-kilometer chunks of bioengineered flesh falling toward the planet. One massive piece fell nearby, impacting with enough force to register on seismographs across the continent. "We did it," Koval whispered. She was lying next to Voronov, staring at the same sky. "Emperor's mercy, we actually did it." On the ground, the remaining Tyranid organisms were going feral. Without synapse control, without the Hive fleet's coordination, they lost all semblance of order. Hormagaunts attacked termagants. Warriors turned on smaller organisms. The swarm was consuming itself. Across the planet, Imperial forces saw their chance. Tanks emerged from hiding. PDF soldiers came out of bunkers. The counteroffensive began. Voronov forced himself to sit up. Every movement was agony. He looked for the figure. It had climbed out of the Valkyrie and was standing on top of the wreckage, looking at the chaos, at the dying bioship, at the feral Tyranids tearing each other apart. Then it started walking, not toward safety, toward the nearest concentration of feral organisms. "It's still fighting," Volkov said. "We won. The planet's saved, and that thing is still fighting." Voronov watched the figure disappear into the ruins. He could still hear it, the roar of its shotgun, the scream of its chainsaw. "It's not fighting for us," Voronov said quietly. "It never was. It's fighting because that's what it does. That's all it does." 5 days later, Inquisitor Gregor Valdane arrived with a full Ordo Xenos investigation fleet. Valenor's rest had been secured. The feral Tyranids had been hunted down and exterminated. The orbital debris from the destroyed bioship had been catalogued. The surviving population was being evacuated. 7 million dead. 3 major cities reduced to biomass. Entire continents scarred by digestion pools. But the Tyranid threat had been eliminated. Voronov stood before Valdane in what remained of the planetary command center. The Inquisitor was a tall man, his face scarred from decades of fighting Xenos threats. His eyes were the cold grey of someone who'd seen too much and believed too little. "Tell me everything," Valdane said. Voronov did. He started with the portal and ended with the bioship's destruction. He left nothing out. Every detail, every kill, every impossible thing the warrior had done. Valdane listened without interruption. When Voronov finished, the Inquisitor was silent for a long moment. "This warrior," Valdane said finally. "You never learned its identity, never saw its face." "No, sir. It never spoke, never removed its helmet. It allowed us to follow, but it never acknowledged us as allies." "And the portal?" "Still active, deep in the mining tunnels." Valdane nodded slowly. "Show me." They descended into the tunnels, past collapsed sections, past dried ichor and scorch marks, past places where the rock had been melted by weapons that shouldn't exist. The cavern was exactly as Voronov remembered, and the portal was still there, still pulsing with that crimson and emerald energy that hurt to look at. Valdane approached it carefully. He pulled out scanning equipment, ran every test in the Inquisitorial arsenal. Finally, he lowered his instruments. "I've been an Inquisitor for 43 years, Valdane said quietly. "I've seen Necron phase technology, Eldar webway gates, chaos rifts that lead to places that shouldn't exist. This is none of those things. This is something else entirely." "Sir, the warrior—" "I know," Valdane interrupted. "It's returning." Voronov heard it before he saw it. The heavy footsteps, the clink of weapons against armor. The figure emerged from the tunnel entrance. It was covered in fresh ichor. Its armor was more damaged than before, deep gouges showing where even that miraculous material had been tested. But it was walking steadily, weapons secured. Voronov stepped forward. He had to know. One more time. One last chance. "Who are you?" he asked. "Please, where did you come from? Why did you help us?" The figure stopped, turned to face him fully. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the figure reached to its armor and detached something, a spent shotgun shell, larger than any Imperial weapon would use. It was warm to the touch, marked with symbols that Voronov didn't recognize. Writing, perhaps, or identification codes from a civilization that had never existed in Imperial records. The figure held it out. Voronov took it. His hand was shaking. "Thank you," Voronov said, "for everything. You saved us. You saved millions of people who will never know your name. Thank you." The figure tilted its head slightly, then it nodded once. Through the reflective visor, Voronov thought he saw something, not a face, not even eyes, but an idea, a concept, fury given physical form, rage distilled into matter and energy, violence as a philosophy, as the fundamental state of being. This wasn't a person who fought monsters. This was something that existed to kill monsters. That's all there was. No mercy. No doubt, no hesitation. Just endless, absolute violence directed at anything that preyed on the innocent. The figure turned and walked toward the portal. As it approached, the energy intensified. Voronov could hear those distant sounds again. The grinding music, the roar of weapons, the fury that never ended. The figure stepped through. The portal pulsed once, brighter than before. Then it collapsed with a sound like reality tearing. The energy dissipated, leaving only scorch marks and the lingering smell of ozone and gunpowder. "Well," Valdane said after a long moment, "that was enlightening." The debriefing took 6 weeks. Inquisitorial telepaths combed through Voronov's memories, verifying every detail. Magos Kalix's servo-skull recordings were examined frame by frame, analysed by Mechanicus tech priests, who declared the footage both genuine and impossible. Every witness was interviewed. Every piece of physical evidence was catalogued. The scorch marks where the portal had been. The crater where the Hive tyrant had died. The wreckage of the bioship, still being processed by Mechanicus salvage teams. The official report stated that Valenor's rest had been saved by exceptional valor from the Planetary Defense Forces, combined with a catastrophic malfunction in the Tyranid Hive fleet's coordination systems. A full company of Space Marines was credited with destroying the bioship, even though no Space Marines had been within 100 light-years. The truth was classified at the highest levels of Imperial secrecy. Most of the witnesses were mind-wiped. Some were reassigned to distant sectors where they'd never encounter each other again. A few simply disappeared, their service records erased. But Voronov convinced Valdane to spare him. "Someone needs to remember," Voronov argued. "Someone needs to know what really happened. If it comes back, if another portal opens, someone needs to understand what we're dealing with." Valdane considered this for a long time. Finally, he nodded. "You'll be assigned to a monitoring station," Valdane said, "built directly over the former portal location. Your orders are simple. Watch for any signs of another breach, and if you see one, contact me immediately." 3 months later, Voronov sat at his desk in the monitoring station. It was quiet. Too quiet. The sensors hummed. The screens showed nothing but baseline readings. He kept the spent shotgun shell on his desk. No Magos in the Mechanicus could identify the symbols. No database in the Imperium contained any reference to technology like that. It was a mystery. An impossibility. But it was real. Voronov picked up the shell, feeling its weight. Somewhere beyond the barriers of reality, beyond the warp and the materium and everything the Imperium understood, there was a warrior. Not a Space Marine. Not an Imperial champion. Something else. Something that existed solely to kill monsters. And the terrifying part wasn't that such a being existed. The terrifying part was that it was necessary. That somewhere in the infinite universe, things existed that were so terrible, so consuming, so absolutely destructive that they required an equal and opposite force. A force of pure violence. Pure rage. Pure distilled fury. Voronov set the shell back on his desk and returned to his monitoring duties. If the Tyranids ever came back to Valenor's rest, if the shadow in the warp descended again, he knew what might save them. He also knew that what saved them was more terrifying than what it saved them from. But as he sat in the quiet monitoring station, listening to the sensors and watching the screens, Voronov found himself hoping something. He hoped that Warrior was still out there, still fighting. Because if beings like that existed, if there were forces in the universe dedicated to destroying monsters with that level of commitment, then maybe, just maybe, humanity had a chance, even if those forces were more frightening than the darkness itself. Even if Salvation wore green armor and carried weapons that defied explanation. Even if the thing that saved you was just as likely to kill you if you got in its way. Because in a universe full of horrors, sometimes the only thing that can save you is an even greater horror pointed in the right direction. Voronov picked up the shell one more time, turned it over in his hands, felt the weight of it. Somewhere, in some other reality, that warrior was still fighting, still killing, still existing as pure, focused violence. And Voronov was grateful for it. This case file is now closed, but countless others await investigation. If you want more nightmare scenarios, impossible battles and encounters that defy explanation, subscribe and hit that notification bell. The multiverse is infinite and the horrors within it never sleep. Until next time, stay vigilant.